There's a storm across the valley. The clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is April 21st, 2022. My name is Priscilla, Almquist-Olsen, your host, and today I have a very special guest, Carol Doherty, who is a state rep representing Taunton and Easton. And welcome, Carol. It's so nice to see you in person.
Absolutely in person. Thank you so much, Priscilla. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes. And tell us a little bit about that increased representation that you now will be looking forward to in Easton.
So I currently represent Precinct 6, as it has been for 10 years. Every 10 years the census is conducted and the districts have shifted somewhat, mostly along the edges. The reason the districts have shifted, before I talk about what I do represent in Easton, is the effort on the part of the legislature to create more majority-minority districts. And so in this area, Brockton has shifted a little bit, Easton has shifted, and so has Taunton, in order to make room for the majority-minority district in this area. So to your question, I now represent Precinct 6, Precinct 5, and also half of Precinct 4, so I'll be representing 4A. And as I understand it, it's the first time that a precinct has been split in Easton.
Yes, and for those of you viewers at home, if you do not know what your current precinct is, or shall we say perhaps your new precinct, some of you will not have any changes, but a good majority of you will. So please go online to Town of Easton website, and there you will find in the clerk's office, town clerk's office, the information that you need. So when you go to the polls this Saturday, April 23rd, at the Oliver Ames High School between 10 and 4, you will be prepared to tell them the precinct. But Carol, you're not running in April, you're running in November.
In November, it will be. So I've served on the school board in Taunton for 5 terms, 10 years, and stepped down when I was elected to the state representative seat in a special election. Our state representative then, yours as well, here in Easton, Shauna O'Connell, became mayor. And so there was a special election held right after the pandemic, that March. We stepped out of our lives the middle of March, and the election was held the end of March. So I have represented Easton for a year and a half now. The election was in November, and the election last year in 21, and the election will be again this year in 22 for another 2-year term. So I'm really looking forward to getting my feet firmly planted in the State House and in the district, as we have not been allowed during the pandemic. So it's really going to be an exciting new adventure for me going forward with this re-election campaign, number one, and being able to represent the district in a very different and one-on-one personal basis.
You know, it's interesting that you should mention that you spent 10 years on the Taunton School Committee, because a lot of women get their start in politics, in public service, with the school committee, because they have children in school and they have a really vested interest in seeing that the schools perform efficiently and well. So that was your start. Had you always had political leanings, though?
Well, I have to say yes, in part. My dad, back in the day, ran for state representative himself. We lived in Fall River at the time. He wasn't successful, but he always made us watch the news, and he loved talking about politics. And you can imagine, as a young person and as a teenager, talking about politics was the last thing that we wanted to do. But nonetheless, we watched the news, watch the Sunday news, and I think that sort of ingrained the idea of paying attention to the broader world was really important. When I became a teacher, I became very active in the teachers union and rose to the presidency of the local union and then to the state union as well. So I served in that capacity as state president of the Mass Teachers Association for 4 years.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. How
Well, there you go.
wonderful. So you really are a leader in many different capacities, let's put it that way.
Exactly. So that experience really precipitated my real interest by necessity and just interest in politics. I became a lobbyist for the union. I spent time in the State House testifying and lobbying legislators on behalf of the teachers and children across the Commonwealth at that time. And obviously in my capacity now, I still do that. So
Sure.
that really piqued my interest. And so I became, I went on, I worked at Northeastern University for 18 years as Director of Professional Development there, and so it was really important for me to be immersed in community activity, talking about policy development with them and also developing professional development programs across the Commonwealth. When I left that work after 18 years, I thought, union president, university, K-12 experience, what am I going to do with all of that experience? I don't knit, I don't sew. So
Do you cook?
I thought, well, I'm going to run for school board in order to share my experience in education over those 3 activities over the years. And so I did do that and was successful for 5 terms. And when this seat became available, when the then state representative stepped out to become mayor, I thought that this was a nice opportunity for me to represent not only the constituents in my district, but the people in the Commonwealth in a broader context. And so
Well, you certainly
here I
have
am.
a wealth of experience, and certainly much more than many of our state reps. So I applaud you for all of that and your
Thank you.
willingness to step forward, because you could have said, "Well, it's time to retire and travel
I
the
could
world."
have. Some say, "What are you doing?"
Right.
I'm the kind of person, I know myself very well, as most of us do, and it is important to me to be engaged in work that I consider meaningful and useful to the people that I know and the people in my community, and of course in the Commonwealth as well. It's just, it's what keeps us going, being meaningfully engaged in work and activity.
Well, there are so many articles about that very subject, social engagement. Even if it's just going to church or synagogue every week, if you're socially engaged, you live longer. It's a matter of longevity.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So anyway, what have been your proudest accomplishments, do you think, or the accomplishments that have served the people you represent well?
Well, I think being elected right on the heels of the pandemic and legislating from home without any kind of training as new freshman legislators would ordinarily get in normal times, I think that being able to continue on and legislate well without that kind of training, finding my way, I believe in retrospect is an accomplishment. There were some very difficult and controversial issues that we had to legislate on. Police reform is one of those things. That was the first piece of legislation that was put before me as a freshman legislator, sitting in my home, bedroom slippers and all, legislating on that very, very critical and important piece of legislation. And so there were a lot of phone calls, a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of virtual interactions in order to be assured as I asked questions. I met with union people, I met with police chiefs, I met with ordinary police officers as well as members of the communities that I represent in order to be sure that I was moving in the right direction. And you're probably aware that that was a very controversial piece of legislation. So that was my baptism by fire, and I think, and I don't mean it in a cavalier way, but being able to survive that first leg of my legislative journey was an accomplishment. Going forward, as I was reelected on the heels of the March election during the pandemic that November, I had my own term, my own 2-year term, and so therefore eligible, for example, to be appointed to committees. So I was appointed to the Committee on Children and Families and Persons with Disabilities, very close to the education work that I had been doing, working with children who were at risk, working with children who were in difficult circumstances. Also appointed to the Election Laws Committee, which is a very crucial committee to the electorate and to the Commonwealth. Also, state administration and we don't meet very often. State administration and bonding and state administration, that's the name of the committee. That committee oversees the governor's bond issues. So the governor creates a bond ask and it comes to the committee and we rule on the governor's recommendations for bonding money to help largely infrastructure and transportation issues in this last bonding round. And then my last committee is a climate committee, not a joint committee. The other 3 were joint, meaning the Senate and the House meeting together. And that committee on climate, interestingly enough, has never met. So
It's what?
it's never met. So I look forward to, especially with climate issues facing us. So I look forward to the time when that committee is called. So my work on children and families has been very, very critical, as you can imagine. During the pandemic, children who are at risk, children who have been in foster care during the pandemic became the focus of our efforts to make sure that those children were placed in school as well as in a positive home environment for those youngsters, and just overseeing all of the asks for the families, foster families and others, that things that they need in order to support those children. So
Wow, and then obviously you reach out for the opinions not only of experts in the field, but also ordinary citizens who have an interest and are supporting these issues, so that you get a very well-rounded and complete, diverse information from all of these sources.
And I think that's absolutely right, Priscilla. The advocacy groups, the people who are of interest in any particular piece of legislation are really, it's really important for me to hear from those people, not after I've taken the vote, but prior to the vote. If someone is aware of a piece of legislation that they really like and want me to support, or that they don't like and want me to vote no, it's most of the time I hear from people after I vote. Either thank you very much for voting in favor of that bill, whatever that is, or gosh, I wish you didn't vote yes on that. I think that that's a wrong vote. One of the things that strikes me is so interesting dealing with constituents, particularly those, and it really is on rare occasion, who oppose something that I have voted yes on, and they might make a call or send an email, and my practice is to reach out to those folks to just chat about what their issue might be, why they might be opposed to something that I have gone forward and voted yes on. And it's so interesting to me that people will say, is this really State Representative Carol Doherty calling? Is that really you? But we don't agree and you're calling me? My response is, the only way that I'm going to know what my constituents think is if I reach out and talk to them, or vice versa, if they reach out and talk to me about what their concerns are and what their interests are as well, in a positive way. So that's been, it's just been a good path for me to take in terms of communicating with constituents.
And I'm sure that in that journey, you probably have changed some minds. We'll get them to think a little bit more about
maybe
another viewpoint. So
depends on the issue, Priscilla. Right?
Right. So tell me what your vision is for the future, especially for Easton.
Well, let me just kind of track back a little bit. So when Representative Cronin, before Representative Cronin became ambassador to Ireland, Cronin, she represented almost all of Easton except for Precinct 6. And so the representative, the ambassador, always took the lead in terms of getting earmarks for the district, for example, answering constituent questions. Constituent questions would come to me, but by and large they would go to the representative's office. And while we collaborated and talked between us, particularly if someone from Precinct 6 called Claire's office, she would refer that back to me. So we had a good working relationship. Given that I'm going to be reelected and represent more of the district, I have paid very careful attention, as I did previously, to being in Easton, listening to people in Easton. I get more and more messages now from people in Easton asking for this or that other kind of thing. And so I think right now, it is a learning curve for me, and it is a question in my mind about what is it that I need to know so that I can take it to the table in order to enact measures that are going to be meaningful and important to the town of Easton. I think particularly of the PFAS problem with the drinking water that Easton is facing, a $10 million project, as I understand. So being able to access resources, I know that the Representative Cronin did do that, but this town, as I understand it, has had to bond the balance. So $10 million has come from the state, $8 million has been bonded. But that doesn't stand in, and that's a long-term debt that the community will have to mitigate that circumstance. So my conversation with Town Administrator Connor Reed is, what is it that Easton needs from your perspective as Town Administrator that I can bring to the table while we're deliberating on a continuing use of ARPA funds, for example, American Rescue Plan funds, or infrastructure funds, which we will be dealing with going forward before the end of the session. So that conversation is really, really important. I've developed a good relationship with members of the Select Board who also provide me with their thoughts, information. I joined the Lions Club, which I'm looking forward to participating in. They meet relatively frequently, but the Lions Club in Easton is so busy, doing all kinds of wonderful community works. And so,
well, you do know that a few years ago it was chosen the best in the whole wide world.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yes, internationally, Lions Club is all over the world. When I visit my relatives and friends in Sweden, I always go to the Lions Club, and it's called the Lions Club Secondhand Boutique. That is what it's called. And I've gotten so many wonderful, beautiful things that grandmothers embroidered that the granddaughters are just tossing. So, and other items, wood, copper, brass, that kind of thing. Anyway, so lions are all over the world, and so I brought information to two of those Lions clubs in Sweden about Easton being the best in the world, and they were very impressed. And everyone's impressed. I mean, people here see what they do. They're always having fundraisers. Last week they had a 50s sock hop and had a live band playing and so forth. So, yeah, they're doing.
I'm really looking forward to being more fully immersed. I went to my inaugural meeting, and there were so many members in the room that it looked like a banquet. And I belong to a couple of organizations, Kiwanis, for example. We get very few regular participants, unfortunately. So it was pretty astounding to me to see so many members coming just to a regular meeting.
Yes, and they're people from diverse backgrounds. So you'll have Dr. David Mudd, for example, late Avery Lee Williams, who was a broker, and his son Kevin, who's has the business now. He's a member. To somebody who works with the DPW or other public agencies in town, police, fire, and retired people, you know. I mean, it's just quite amazing. And everybody is treated equally. Nobody is, there's no snobbery there. And because the main goal is to support eye research, but also to support scholarships for Easton All-Reims grads going to college, and other community projects. So, yeah, they're there, and they have the people force to accomplish much.
Well, they do indeed, and the reason I raised the Lions is that it's such a wonderful opportunity for me as a state legislator to meet more and more people, to have conversations with them, and to learn more about what their interests and wants and needs and concerns might be in terms of the role of a state representative, and that's very important, I think, in order for me to do my work. So you asked about my vision for the future, perhaps for my next term. The legislature has been focused to a great extent in the past year and a half that I've served on just helping people survive the pandemic and the enormous negative impact, especially on our poorer communities, on our poorer people. So we have provided free school lunches when the kiddos came back. We've provided resources for our schools to be able to purchase computers as our children were working at home, not in the most ideal circumstances for learning, but nonetheless, I think that everyone stepped up to try to help to support continued learning. Rent subsidies for small businesses in order to keep those small businesses going. Those kinds of things, trying to to encourage daycare centers to reopen and providing resources for those daycare centers, clearly critical. So, you connect housing to jobs, to healthcare, to education, to early childhood education and childcare. Everything is not unique unto itself, but it's like the body. The thigh bone is connected to whatever other bone it's connected to. We're a whole community, and so everything that goes on in that community points to the well-being of its citizenry. And so I think, for example, the budget that we are about to embark on deciding within the next week is a $49.6 billion budget.
Wow.
With some 1,400 amendments provided by the legislature to help to enhance that budget. Local projects, for example. So the focus is on we're here to help people. We're here to connect with the communities and the citizens in the community. Very often I respond to messages. So when I get a message from someone who is outside of my district, I always respond to that message, not in a problem-solving way, but to say, your state representative is so-and-so, I'm going to forward that message to that person. And that's the kind of relationship that we have in the legislature, that we help to support one another by providing information that may come our way that might not be in our purview. So I think that kind of collaboration and collegiality is really critical to weaving that whole cloth for the Commonwealth. Going forward, the budget promises to continue to support people who were negatively impacted by the pandemic, and then to provide help and support going forward, like some substantial funds for workforce training, for example. I filed a bill that, at the request of SEIU 1199, they are a union that represents healthcare workers, that are home healthcare workers, and that level of certified nursing assistants, that the bill creates a pilot project that focuses on workforce development and shortens the timeline for that person to get that CNA certificate and be paid at the same time. So if you're in a job, but you want to pursue that level of training, that you can continue in that job, pursue that level of training, and continue to be paid, so you don't have to leave your work in order to do your training and then get that certificate. There's a real crisis in the Commonwealth around that level of, around workers generally, but in this particular instance, certified nursing assistants. And it's got some very positive reviews. It was passed out of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee with a positive recommendation. And what happens is bills get filed in both the Senate and the House, so that you take your chances, and people working together have a higher probability of getting legislation passed. And so that has happened. That bill is now residing in Senate Ways and Means and has a high probability of being successful.
Well, that's wonderful because we have a real shortage of assistant nurses, certified assistant nurses, but also nurses and other medical personnel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there is a critical need. And we lost people who were on the job during the highest COVID surges, who died of COVID themselves. So, you know, it's important to do whatever we can to assist those people from sticking with it and getting the additional training so that their lives are improved as well economically. And
so it's about helping people. It's about creating, in this instance, that pipeline of persons who can take those jobs. Another bill that I filed has to do, patterned after a bill in Rhode Island, an enacted piece of legislation that provides grant money to people who are disabled and the elderly who want to stay in their own homes, but need some kind of accommodation in order for them to do well in that environment. And that has been passed forward with a positive recommendation. We don't know what will happen at the end of the legislative session, but nonetheless, that's a piece of legislation that's moving forward, and it is a helping piece of legislation. I think that more and more, particularly for the elderly, they really don't want to go into care homes unless that's an absolute essential circumstance for them. And all of the research points in the direction of elderly people particularly doing better and living longer and a better quality of life in their own homes than in a care home.
right, and they do live longer in their own homes, of
So
course.
I'm really excited about the possibility as a freshman legislator getting things through the pipeline and to the final disposition of that legislation is really an exciting
Well,
thing.
I mean, that is one of, I'm a member of AARP, and I would think that the local chapter here in Massachusetts would be of great assistance in getting that bill passed, because that's one of their main foci.
Yeah. And this is so it's an up to $5,000 grant, and it's not a loan. So the person who receives that money doesn't have to return that payment. It's here.
Is this a one-time payment or is it an annual?
So one imagines, for example, if you need to have safety bars in your shower or even along your hallway, if you need to rent one of those chairs that goes up the stairs, those resources are used to be able to support that. So it would be basically a one-time grant.
So the bill tags the different uses that those funds can be applied to.
So not specifically. It says the bill talks about accommodations to allow that person to stay in their home, but it would be remanded to the Committee on Elderly Affairs, and there's a Health and Human Services. So they would create, if the bill is enacted, those the Commission and Health and Human Services would create the regulations that would be applied to the implementation of the bill.
So it's probably not going to pay for human assistance.
No, it won't. It's more equipment.
Equipment,
To facilitate, if you have to lower a counter or something like that, if someone is in a wheelchair, for example, making those accommodations in the home.
You know, I'm really impressed with your overall discussion about why it's important for you to be a representative, that there is purpose in your life when you help other people. And so often people get involved in government and politics as a stepping stone for his or her own future. And I'm wondering, are those people few and far between in the legislature?
Because I can't.
I'm sorry if that was
I would say, though, that people who might be younger than I aspire to do good things as a public servant, whether it's in the state legislature or on a school board or something else. And so those persons might aspire to positions in the legislature that would provide them the opportunity to be even more impactful in the work that they propose to do over their careers.
So you think that their ambition is based on a good motive?
I would like to think that, yes. And I haven't met anyone yet in the legislature that has, other than the best interests of the Commonwealth.
You know, it's interesting you should talk about, you've said the best interests of Easton residents or the best interests of Commonwealth. My father was chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in Easton during the 50s and early 60s, and he always talked about getting as many opinions and collecting as much data. And he said the table should be laden with opinions and all. And then I analyze, I look at all of this information. And then what do? I decide on the basis of what's in the best interest of of the people of Easton. And when I ran for the New York State Assembly, I
Did you say the New York State Assembly?
Yes. Chuck Schumer, actually.
You should be the interviewee.
No, well, I met Chuck Schumer too. Then I had known him previously because he would conduct these workshops, training people how to run a campaign. So I met him many years before I was asked by the Speaker of the Assembly to run for my district, and it was a wonderful experience. And Chuck Schumer gave me great advice. Daniel Patrick Moynihan was senator, U.S. senator at that time, and he held a fundraiser for me. And he was so popular that I was running as a Democrat, but I had as many Republicans and independents there because they adored this man. And he talked as if he had known me his whole life. We had just met that day. But it was a wonderful experience. And
now, were you elected, Priscilla, to the Assembly?
I should have been, because the polls said the night before that I was winning. And then, as you know...
We know about polls now.
Yes, and they can be very precarious. And it just, the election day, the tables were turned. I lost by 0.5%. It was, I was told, if 400 people had voted for me and not the other guy, I would have been in the Assembly.
So that is just really a statement in reality, in your reality, that says to the electorate, please, go out and vote. Your vote does make a difference.
Yes.
It does make a difference.
Right. And it was a special election, and it was in February, so maybe you're right. There were people who, for whom the winter and its conditions prevented them from going out. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience, and I loved the debates and all that goes with it, and so. But
so
anyway,
you're going to be my go-to person, given that experience, Priscilla. So thanks for that information.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, this is about you. It's not about me.
Well, it's about both of us.
Oh, okay. But so, please tell our viewers, in conclusion, why they should vote for Carol Doherty for state rep.
So I think that if your viewers have been listening to our conversation in this half hour of time, and thank you very much for the opportunity, you will find that I'm a completely transparent person. Whatever it is that you see is what you see. You ask me a question and I will give you the best answer that I possibly can. And if I don't know what the answer to that question is, then I'm going to go find out what the answer to that question is and get back to you. One of the things that I think is very important to me when a constituent reaches out and says, I need help with this, I will go forward and try to help it to the extent that I'm available, or lead that person in a direction where they might meet someone else who can better facilitate an answer to their question or to help solve their problem. But I almost always, if not always, circle back as time passes to just check in to see how that person is doing. Did they have their question answered? Were they able to achieve the goal that they had when we first had that conversation? It's very important to me to know that in some way, if I'm not directly responsible for solving a problem, that I have facilitated the problem-solving process and keep talking to that person. So I think that, and I do spend quite some time in Easton. I have presented at various veterans events, the upcoming Memorial Day parade and speech giving. I will participate in that, and Purple Heart Day and Vietnam Vets Day and all of the wonderful celebrations that you have here in Easton. I have been invited to participate in and to present in, and so I feel like I am growing my visibility in the community, and I am always accessible, whether I'm on the street or you see me at a restaurant or you send me an email. I will
So it's
always,
okay to talk to you when you're eating dinner?
I have a story about a movie star that I met who told me to go away when I did that. So yes, of course, it's all right for you to stop me when I'm eating. As a matter of fact, if someone recognizes me in a public place, it's nice to be recognized.
Sure.
Rather than who did you say you were?
Yeah.
It's nice to know that people know me as their state representative.
And
so,
also that you're accessible. I mean, I think that's the most important factor.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carol Doherty, so much for coming and presenting who you are as a person, as a legislator, and as a representative of Easton. We appreciate your coming today. So people, don't forget to vote. It's a few months away in November, but keep Carol Doherty's name in mind and check her out online. Do you have a website?
I have a website, caroldohertyforstaterep.com.
That's pretty simple to remember.
And a Facebook page, Carol Doherty, State Representative, Facebook page, and it's on my Facebook page where I publish the photographs of places and people that I have been meeting with comments about those kinds of things. So that's
And
a
of
good place
course,
to go.
you probably publish the current issues that you're working on also,
Yes,
and what the
yes.
status
Yeah.
is. So it's a very helpful, those two sites are very helpful. Thank you, Carol.
And I'm just a phone call away, I have
Uh-huh.
to say. I'm just a phone call away.
Thank you so much for joining
Thanks
us.
for inviting me, and perhaps I'll see you again before the election in November. So I'll be on the primary ballot in September, and then, of course, on the general election in November.
Okay, well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
And that's it for Community Forum today. I hope you have enjoyed this as much as we have in presenting it. Until next time, stay well.